signing on here shortly. My name is Matt Murphy. I'm with C Incorporated. We're putting on the Safety Fest. This is our last of our 6 presentations this week. We hope everybody's enjoyed what we've had so far. I think you'll enjoy today. Today we have some great people to be with us. We have Audrey from OSHA that will be leading it off. Then we have Erica from MOSH, and we have Mr. Motley from VOSH. So we will have all three of them speak to their different areas and kind of some updates. What we'd like you to do is keep your mic muted during the session. That way they can get through what their presentation is until they get to the question and answer. If you would, you can just go ahead and shoot me a message in the chat box, and I can keep those questions in the chat box. And then when they're done or they have time for questions, we can go ahead and ask them. If we don't get to everybody's question, please email me. I put my email up there, or you can call my cell. I can do a follow-up later with each one and ask them questions for you and get back to you. Mr. Motley, we can hear you, I believe, typing. If you want to test your mic real quick. Let me. Just shot him a message real quick. These sessions are recorded. They will be on cinconline.com, free for use. Just check them out. And hopefully, I know we had a ton of people signed up for this, so they may have to do a wait list. So they'll be able to just get access to this. I'm going to go ahead and mute myself in a second, and we can go. Mr. Motley, we can hear you. Can you hear us? All right. Well, I'll call Mr. Motley here in a second while Audrey's going over her deal. I know you're on a time crunch, so let's start off with you. Again, if there's any questions, please feel free to let me know, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, and thanks to everybody for being here today. We really appreciate your participation. I want to agree with Mr. Murphy that this is a great idea. I know that with COVID-19, it has completely upended virtually everything we do and how we do it, but it is really important to not forget about the basics. People continue to go to work every day and get hurt in a lot of the same ways that they've been getting hurt for years, from falls and struck by accidents. And it's really important to stay focused on the basics. And while we're working on protecting people from COVID-19, not forgetting about re-emphasizing and protecting those same employees from all of those old-fashioned hazards that haven't gone anywhere with the pandemic. So today I'm going to just go over briefly some of the regulatory updates from OSHA, just to give you an idea of what's on the regulatory agenda right now. And at the end, we'll cover just a handful of other items. So up first, we have the cranes and derricks and construction for specific to railroad and roadway work. This is a final rule stage, and the final rule should have actually already been issued, and it made some adjustments to the cranes and derricks and construction standard. It likely may not affect you because it was a very specific change, and it basically just provided an exemption related to a particular class of track maintenance hoisting equipment that is specific to railroad roadway work. After the initial final rule on cranes and derricks and construction was issued, the American Association of Railroads filed a petition for review seeking some exemptions that would be specific to the effects that the standard had on their work. So also in the final rule stage is related to the beryllium standards, both in general industry as well as in construction and shipyards. The final rule, which reduced the exposure limits to provide better protection for employees from beryllium exposures, went out in January of 2017. And in December of 2018, OSHA issued a proposed rule to revise some of these standards based on stakeholder feedback and to resolve some pending litigation. So anytime, of course, anytime OSHA changes a rule or issues a new rule, we do get a lot of feedback, and sometimes that does come in the form of litigation. But OSHA tries to respond to the feedback in whatever form that we get it. And so they have come to an agreement and are planning to issue or have issued a final rule related to the compliance with the general industry and construction and shipyards beryllium standards. It maintains the PEL to try to maintain the protections for employees, but they have sought to respond to some of the stakeholder questions and make the standard a little bit easier to understand and easier to simplify some of the compliance requirements. So this slide just continues to talk about that with respect to construction and shipyards. It has been determined and agreed that the vast majority of beryllium exposure in those sectors is going to occur mainly during abrasive blasting and welding, and that's when employees are going to have the highest potential exposure for beryllium. So in the changes that they have proposed, OSHA is trying to tailor the construction and shipyard standards for beryllium more specific to those operations where the employees are most likely to be overexposed, and more closely align those standards with the general industry standards, and again trying to clarify and make the standard a little bit easier to comply with. So you may be familiar with OSHA's whistleblower statute, which with respect to safety and health basically protects employees from retaliation from their employer if they raise safety and health concerns in the workplace, for filing, they have a right to file a complaint with us, participate with our inspections, and so on and so forth without fear of retaliation from their employer as a result of that. What you may not know is that OSHA also is responsible for implementing and providing whistleblower protections for a whole host of other statutes, and more than 20 of them, in fact. And the most recent one is the Taxpayer First Act of 2019, which also has retaliation protections in place that OSHA is responsible for. So this is actually just a procedural regulation that will aid in the efficient processing of whistleblower complaints under this new statute. And that's expected to come out later this year. So similarly, like I mentioned, OSHA is responsible for more than 20 whistleblower statutes. So they're in the process of reviewing and updating procedures for handling an investigation of retaliation complaints under a number of those whistleblower statutes. And this update would basically try to make the investigation procedures more consistent among the statutes to make it easier for both the employers and the employees that are involved in those investigations. And it would allow for some filings by electronic means to make it easier for all to access. And that interim rule is expected early next year. So we also have in the works a proposed rule related to powered industrial trucks, and more specifically the maintenance, use, and training. So now that OSHA is 50 years old, you may or may not realize that a lot of our original standards were based largely upon the existing safety and health standards that were in effect at the time. For example, the powered industrial truck standard, a lot of it was based on a 1969 ANSI standard, and a portion of the standard actually references the 1969 ANSI standard within our own standard. And basically, we're kind of stuck with that if it's in the standard and referencing the 1969 standard. But the Industrial Truck Association actually reached out to OSHA and requested that we update and expand the OSHA standards to account for the substantial revisions to the ANSI standards that have occurred over the last 50 or so years. So OSHA issued a request for information last year to determine if we needed to make changes to the requirements for locations of use, maintenance, training, and operation of powered industrial trucks. And OSHA is planning to develop a proposed rule to update the reference and hour standard to the 2016 version of the ANSI standards instead of the old 1969 standard that it was originally based on. And that's expected to come out later this year. So there are a couple of proposed changes to our silica standards. You're probably familiar with the silica and construction standard by now. It's been in effect since 2017. And if you are, then you're probably familiar with Table 1 of the standard, which is a major component of the standard. It lists out specific dust control methods related to specific equipment or tasks that are common in the construction industry. And basically, the expectation is that if an employer fully and completely and properly implements and follows Table 1, then the expectation is that their workers doing those tasks, using those control methods, would be below the permissible exposure limit. So then that essentially exempts the employer from certain other requirements of the standard, like having to do their own exposure assessments. Because like I said, if they're fully and properly, with those being the key words, fully and properly implementing Table 1, then the assumption is that they're below the PEL. Well, in 2019, OSHA issued a request for information trying to determine whether or not there are additional control measures that maybe should be considered and or additional tasks and tools that could be added to the table and potentially expand Table 1. So OSHA is currently evaluating the information that they've been collecting to determine if revisions to Table 1 may be appropriate. And they're looking at maybe spring of 2021 to issue a new proposed rule related to that. So still talking about silica, we also have silica standards not just for construction, but also for general industry and maritime. But unlike many of the other OSHA expanded health standards like lead, for example, which includes a provision for medical removal protections for employees after they're exposed at a certain level, the silica standards didn't include any such of provision. So as a result, like I said, OSHA often gets a lot of feedback when we issue new rules or make changes to our standards. And in this case, industry and labor organizations petitioned for a review of the rule because they were concerned that OSHA had not included provisions for medical removal protection for employees under our silica standards. So it was concluded that OSHA had failed to adequately explain its decision for why these protections were omitted from the rules, and it was sent back to OSHA for further consideration. So OSHA expects to issue a proposed rule in April of 2021 related to potential medical removal protections under the silica standards. So a lot of people may be curious as to what kind of violations does OSHA find when we go out and do our inspections. So the next slide, we're going to talk about the top 10 violations that were cited in fiscal year 2019 during OSHA inspections, which if you follow along with this at all, if you've seen any of the previous year's top 10 violations, they don't change a whole lot from year to year. I have found a lot of the same top 10 violations are the same from year to year. Unfortunately, we keep citing it and people continue to violate these standards. So as you look at these, keep that in mind and consider how well you are complying with these standards. So the number one issue that is cited by OSHA or was cited by OSHA in fiscal year 2019 were fall protection requirements, the general requirements set forth in 1926-501. The second most frequently cited standards came out of the hazard communication standards, followed by scaffolding, which also often relates to fall hazards. Lockout tagout came in at number 4. Ladder violations at number 5, which again often results in potential fall hazards for employees. followed by respiratory protection standard violations at number 6, powered industrial trucks that we talked about just a few slides ago. Citations related to powered industrial trucks was the number 7 most frequently cited standards. And then again, coming in at number 8, we see fall protection. Again, this time related to the training requirements that are set out in 503. So not only do you have to ensure that you've provided the fall protection and that the employees are properly using the fall protection, but you also have to make sure that you have trained your employees in recognizing fall hazards and when and how to properly use their fall protection. And not only do you have to train them, you also have to make sure that you have certified the training in a written documentation. And that came in at number 8 for the 8th most frequently cited standards for 2019. Coming in at number 9 is machine guarding, and this reference is specific to 1910 to 12 for general industry, but we still see a lot of unguarded saws and things like that that are related to machine guarding in construction as well. And then at number 10, you've got eye and face protection. So not only making sure that you've provided the proper eye and face protection for the employees, but making sure that they are using it, because that's often an issue when we go out and do inspections. We find that the employees have the safety glasses, the employer provided them, but for whatever reason, they're just not wearing them, and the employer doesn't have a mechanism in place to ensure that their employees do wear their face and eye protection. So moving on to COVID-19, which seems to be the topic of the day, as it has been pretty much every day for the last 6 months. We're going to go through just a few quick slides because I do feel like the main focus of this Safety Fest is to remind employers that you do need to focus on those more traditional hazards that we've talked about, some of the things that we mentioned in the top 10 violations slide that are really important to make sure that while you're working on complying with all of these new challenges with COVID-19, that you're also protecting your employees from all of those hazards that have existed for years. So OSHA is working closely with other government agencies, the Department of Health and Human Services, CDC, NIOSH more specifically, in developing tools to try to help employers and employees understand the risk and what they can do to protect themselves. And OSHA does want to make note of the fact that the risk of exposure in many workplaces is very likely similar to the same risk that those employees have when they're out in the general public in the community where their workplace is located. But you do have to do a risk assessment of your own circumstances and determine what the risk level is at your workplace, because risk does increase when workers have frequent close contact with the general public or other workers, or in particular industries, specifically like healthcare and meatpacking and industries like that. So OSHA is basically enforcing a lot of our existing standards when we're looking at protecting employees from COVID-19, especially the PPE standards. If you're in healthcare, you also want to pay attention to the bloodborne pathogen standards. Portions of that may be applicable. And something that you may or may not think about is the hazard communication standard. And we already talked about that is typically in the top 10 most frequently cited standards by OSHA. But with the advent of COVID-19 and the increased cleaning, if you've got people on your work site that are constantly going around wiping down surfaces multiple times a day using these cleaning items, they may be purchased over the counter and you may think of them as just your everyday household items. But if they're using them now in a quantity and manner more frequently than you would normally use them at home, then you need to make sure that you have included those products in your hazard communication program. And we always have the general duty clause. So if there were an inspection where there were hazards present related to COVID-19, and we didn't already have an existing standard in place that we could apply to abate the hazard, OSHA always has the option of issuing a 5A1 or a general duty citation. And the general duty clause, of course, requires an employer to provide a place of employment that is free from recognized safety and health hazards that may cause serious harm to their employees. And obviously, COVID-19 is definitely a recognized hazard at this point that can cause serious harm. So if you go to our OSHA website, you can go just to www.osha.gov, and there will be a link to the coronavirus information prominently displayed. But if you want to go the extra effort and include the /coronavirus, that'll take you directly to the coronavirus page where OSHA is compiling all of our publications. They've got frequently asked questions and a number of different tools that employers can use in trying to assess their workplaces and provide appropriate protections for their employees. Oh, that slide that I accidentally skipped over was just an example of some of the tools. Let me see if I can go back. So there is a publication related to a job hazard analysis. That's something that has been out for quite a while because it's applicable not just to COVID-19, but virtually any job task that you're doing. But they have a lot of COVID-19 specific resources that are available, like the guidance on returning to work publication. And through an alliance program, they are keeping a running list that they update with some regularity of a compilation of COVID-19 resources, not just from OSHA, but also from NIOSH, CDC, and other organizations. So just to give you an idea of some of the statistics related to COVID-19 and OSHA, nationally, they've processed almost 9,000 complaints and almost 1,200 referrals related to COVID-19. Just over 8,000 of those have been closed as of the time that this presentation was put together, which means that the other ones are still being reviewed or under investigation. So more locally as a region, Region 3 has processed over 1,700 complaints and referrals related to COVID-19. And the Baltimore, Washington area office where I work has been responsible for 90 of those. So as an agency, nationally, over 1,000 inspections have been performed related to COVID-19. And within our region, Region 3 has conducted just over 40 inspections, and the Baltimore, Washington area office has conducted 4 of those inspections in the District of Columbia. So if you need some information, like I said, the OSHA website is a very good source of information. We also have the 1-800-OSHA, 1-800-321-OSHA phone number that you can call, and your call will then be routed to the appropriate place. So again, I want to thank you for your participation and your time and attendance today, and wish you all a great and safe rest of your day and weekend. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a great presentation, and we'll move right along. Erica, if you can jump in and unmute yourself.
Sure will. Good morning, everybody. My name is Erica Erdman. I'm with Maryland OSHA. Mr. Michael Straka, our Assistant Commissioner, wanted to be here today to speak, but however, when we got this request, he was already scheduled for vacation, so he asked me to sit in for him. I've been with MOSH almost 15 years. I'm a regional supervisor. I cover Region 5. We cover Anne Arundel and Howard County. So if I have met you in the field, I apologize. Hopefully it went well. What I want to talk to about you guys, or what I want to talk about today, is just how busy MOSH has been since COVID-19 has affected all of us, and just some of the steps that we're taking as an agency to keep our employees and the employer and employees out in the field safe. Since March 16th, we've had 45 accidents and 22 fatalities that MOSH has been out on. We've had a pretty heavy presence in the field this whole time, but it seems like, especially after June 1st, the world went back to work and they forgot about safety, as I'm sure all of you can relate. So just to break that down a little bit, Out of the 45 accidents, we've had 20 related to falls, 7 related to crush by, struck by, 2 related to electrical shocks, 7 related to amputations, 2 related to tree care, 1 related to caught in and caught in between, and then 6 other. Out of the 22 fatalities that we've had, 3 were related to falls, 1 was an electrocution, 4 was related to crush by, struck by, 1 was related to tree care. We had 12 fatalities related to COVID-19, and then we had 1 other, which was a chemical exposure. So we've been very busy out there responding to these accidents. Just like you guys, we've had, a learning curve for COVID-19, not only for our enforcement staff, but for the office staff as well. Most everybody has been working from home. I've been one of the few people that have been in the office every day, just trying to make sure everything goes smoothly and, we're still maintaining our presence out in the field. The inspectors out in the field, what they are doing is everybody's been provided a face mask. Everybody has hand sanitizer. We're trying to maintain that 6 feet of social distance as best as we can. And then when we request materials, we're asking them or you guys to email them to us so we don't have to hand materials back and forth. This is for our enforcement staff and consultation staff. Our consultation staff is also doing some virtual visits when we can. The enforcement staff, it just doesn't work that well to do the virtual visits. So we are out in the field doing our inspections. The inspectors, when they're going out in the field, they have to complete a survey to determine whether it's going to be safe for them or not to be out in the field. So this survey will include, are employees wearing face masks? Can we socially distance? Is this a low hazard, meaning construction, we're all outside? Is it a mid-level hazard? Do we have to be inside? Or is it a high hazard? Is it a hospital setting? Is it healthcare? So those are the things that the inspectors are doing to make sure they're safe before they start their inspection. Like I said, consultation is doing some virtual visits. I think that's working out pretty well for them. We also have a new employer through our SHARP program through consultation, which is the Safety and Health Recognition Program. I'm not sure if you guys have ever heard of that, but it's almost a step below our VPP. It's more for, this is actually a construction company, but it is more tailored toward general industry. This is A&A Global Industries. They're located in Cockeysville, Maryland, which is right up the street from our office. And they are construction metal coating company. So congratulations to them for making that recognition program. We do have cooperative compliance partnerships that we have been going or getting started back up. So VPP is our voluntary protection program, and that is more for our general industry side. Most of those inspections are being done virtual right now. And then we have our SPECS program, which is Strategic Partnership for Excellence in Construction Safety. Not sure if you've ever heard of that. It's relatively new. We are also doing those inspections virtual. The CCP program, which is the Cooperative Compliance Partnership Program, we are starting to get that program running back up. And this is for more big construction. I am actually heading that up, and we are actually doing an on-site visit starting next week. This will be our first visit since COVID happened. So what we're doing with this, usually we have 20 people walking with us, if not more during this time. I always like to call it a mother goose and her gooselings walking around because you had so many people following you. So we're trying to limit the amount of people that we have walk with us and just keep it to really whoever the GC has walking with us and then our personnel, and then keeping the foreman and the safety people in the area where the employees are working so they're available when we need them. The opening conference for that too, it's usually done in the general contractor's trailer. We're trying to do that outside. So we're just trying to really be smart, to protect our personnel as well as the employer and the employees in the field with this new normal that we're all dealing with. Training and education. This is something completely new for us. I'm sure, as you guys know, we've had so many classes available at our Hunt Valley office, and we just have not been doing any of them since COVID happened. So we're looking at doing just like this, the speaker presentations virtually. We're also looking at putting some webinars together and, online safety topics. One of the things that Mr. Straka is talking about is doing maybe 5 or 10 minute blast presentations. That way we'll actually be able to hit, maybe contractors in the field, they can watch it on their phone. We can upload it to YouTube. That way, instead of sitting in a classroom for an hour or a half hour, you have everything you need within 10 or 15 minutes just to deliver some information. So those are some things we're looking at with that. Talking about the adoption process that Audrey talked about through OSHA. So I don't know if you guys know how it works for us. So when federal OSHA actually puts something out that it's been adopted, the state programs like Maryland has 6 months to adopt the actual as is from OSHA or develop our own. So a couple of those things that Audrey was talking about, we are actually looking at adopting the beryllium standard as is. It's in the Maryland Register right now, and this will affect general industry and construction, much like Audrey was saying. And then we're looking at adopting the online record keeping too. This has been a little drawn out process. I'm not sure what held this up, but that would be much like the OSHA online record keeping. You'll have to go in there and put in your OSHA 300 and 300A logs, like most of the world is doing. But we're getting there, but a little slowly. So hopefully that'll happen soon. We do have a plethora of pamphlets, toolbox talks. We have DVDs available through our library that you can rent out. I put my information in the chat. You can send me an email or give me a call. And what I can do is get some of those things to you. Just like Audrey said, OSHA.gov is a very great website to look at too for those reference guides. A lot of the things that we hand out are OSHA materials. We do have some of our own, but they are related to OSHA. One of the things that we developed since COVID came on was a face mask versus respirator kind of cheat sheet. I was talking to Matt earlier. He said he already has it posted on his website, but it's something that we could get out to you. This came about like pretty early on with COVID because everybody was having questions whether they needed to train their employees on wearing face masks. Was that considered a respirator? So this kind of breaks it down as to what you need to do for the different type of face masks or N95 or KN95s. So if you guys would like that, please let me know and I can provide that. That's about all I had. Getting to the COVID-19, just want to touch on the complaints that we've had for COVID-19. In the state of Maryland, the governor has really put enforcement for COVID-19 on the health departments. We have had jurisdiction in healthcare with the PPE, and much like Audrey was talking about, that's been the bulk of our jurisdiction. Now, we've had a lot of complaints come in. I want to say over 400 complaints. And when we haven't had jurisdiction, we have been addressing those via phone and fax, meaning that somebody from the office will call the employer and then the employer will be responsible for providing us what they're doing to abate the issue, even when we didn't have jurisdiction. So we really have been trying to help out the best that we can for the employees, even when it wasn't necessarily MOSHA's responsibility, but we've been trying to help out with that. And that's about all I have. Any questions?
Thanks. That's great. We'll go over. Where's Mr. Motley? You can unmute your mic and we can go through VOSH and then we'll open up a question and answer session here at the end.
Okay, good morning, Matt. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
All right, good. We've had some technical difficulties this morning. Well, thank you for having me. And the last two speakers kind of set this up rather nicely. My name is Jim Motley, and I am a Compliance, Safety, and Health Officer with the Virginia Department of Labor and Industry out of the Northern Virginia Regional Office. And so I'm just going to kind of talk to you today about our new emergency temporary standard for COVID-19. So Virginia was the first state to enact workplace regulations to try to minimize the spread of COVID-19 in the workplace. And so that standard was adopted by our Safety and Health Codes Board, went into effect on July 27th. There were some additional requirements for training, which the employers were required to meet by August 27th and September 27th, respectively. One was on the new standard and what they intended to do to protect their employees, and the other one was on their pandemic plan. So just some highlights of the standard. One of the things that the standard does is closely follows the CDC guidelines, and we all know that those are constantly changing as we become more familiar with or we learn more about the COVID-19 virus. The standard says that if an employer is complying with the CDC requirements, the most recent CDC requirements and as long as it's as effective as the standard, then they are considered in compliance with that standard. Some of the things that the standard requires that are closely related to the CDC requirements, hazard classification assessments. I think one of your speakers talked about that earlier, classifying your employers as to the hazards associated with the potential contact with COVID-19. Once you've made that classification, there are some training requirements associated with that, protective measures to be taken, whether it be socially distancing, teleworking, worker density, face coverings, that type of thing. There are some requirements for self-assessment. Employers are required to have their employees self-assess prior to coming to work to ensure that they have no signs or symptoms of COVID-19. There's some sanitation requirements, common work spaces and equipment. And it's interesting, one of those common workspaces are actually the porta johns on these job sites, right? So there are sanitation requirements for these. And so with that said, sanitizing common workspaces is a particular interest in the new standard. Return to work requirements for employers to have pandemic plans or what they call infectious disease plans, reporting requirements, that type of thing. So what I'll say is that the standard is performance-based. It's not one size fits all. It basically says what it is that we want to accomplish, which is to try to prevent the spread of COVID-19 in the workplace, and it's up to the employer as to how they meet those requirements. There's a lot of good information on our Department of Labor and Industry website to include training presentations for all the hazard classifications, templates for infectious disease programs. There's a standard itself if you wanted to print out a copy of it. There's a particularly good section called Frequently Asked Questions. Those are kind of the questions that our agency has been getting over the last couple of months that this standard has been into effect. So that's real good information, kind of like letters of interpretation, if you will. Here again, we promote adequate hand washing and sanitation, the risk assessment, and of course protecting our employees through pre-screening and also face covering, social distancing, and those types of things. If you have any questions about the standard, and here again, this applies to employers in the state of Virginia only. I know federal OSHA has they're using their own means of enforcement, and of course I understand Maryland has their health department enforcing theirs. It is enforced here through our standard, and this actually came into existence as a result of stakeholders' requests and also requests by our governor for our commissioner to come up with these standards. Here again, very flexible, not certainly performance-based. And if you guys have any questions and you're in the Commonwealth of Virginia about this new standard, reach out to your consultation programs in your various regional offices. They'd be happy to walk you through, answer any questions that you have. Visit our website, look at those templates, trying to make it as easy as possible for everybody to be in compliance. And with that said, I think that was the only thing that I had today. Some great information from the rest of the speakers, so I appreciate the, that. And so I'll answer any questions that you might have.
Perfect. And thank the three speakers again for stepping up and taking time out of their day to do this. I think it's very important. We do have a few questions that came through. One for Virginia specifically, in the new standard, although it be a performance standard, it specifically states respiratory protection for higher hazard areas, not just face coverings. So they wanted to find out, is that on purpose? Are you requiring N95s or P100s if people are riding together in vehicles and within 6 feet of each other? Or is it really that you're looking for more of the face covering standard itself?
So really it's more about the hazard classification. And so when you talk about high and very high, those are your healthcare workers, those are your emergency medical technicians, your police, fire, and your doctors that are actually, and nurses working on patients known to have COVID-19. You're certainly talking about certain procedures such as dental offices and dental hygiene where you have aerosolized, activities that could increase the likelihood. And all of the information that we've had up until this point is that in the medium to low range categories, social distancing, face coverings, and those types of things are adequate in order to be used as not personal protective equipment in that particular case, but as source control, right? The people being the source. So.
And I'll let either of you speak to this, but when it comes to respirators themselves, a lot of pushback's been coming back because N95, it's meant to protect basically twice the size of what COVID is. We're protecting as best as possible is what I'm telling people. But if either of you want to weigh in on, the use of N95 respirators against a virus that's half the size of what the filtration device is actually designed to do, I know that question comes up quite a bit. So, Erica, did you want to take a shot at that one?
The only thing with the N95, the requirements are much greater for OSHA, VOSH, or MOSH because you do have to do the fit testing. You do have to have the medical evaluation because it's considered a respirator at that point. As far as protecting against the virus, that is way above me.
Yeah, amen. I get it. I get that question all the time. We'll make sure we put it out there. Other questions? Again, you can type them to me right now, or you can email them to me later, and I'll be happy to follow up with any of our speakers. But that was a couple that I had. I think I had one more that came in from a client. What was it? And I think actually you already hit on this, Mr. Motley, about CDC guidelines, that the contractor was asking if they're already trying to work with CDC guidelines, will that meet Virginia's regulations? And I think you touched on that CDC is kind of a moving target, but at least you guys want them to come up with what protects them. Is that correct?
Correct, and there might be some specific requirements in the Virginia standard that may not be necessarily addressed in the CDC requirements that they need to be aware of. However, the standard does say that if an employer is following the most recent CDC guidelines and they're at least as effective as the standard, and the standard was based on those, then they would be considered to be in compliance. We want to make sure that they have their infectious disease control program where applicable, face coverings and social distancing and other measures, barriers, and that type of thing in the workplace. So the answer is, here again, the sanitizing of common workspaces. I would, point out the porta toilets as something that, people don't necessarily think of as a common workspace, or if they do. So there are some additional sanitation requirements there. And so, yes, as long as the CDC, requirements are being met, and it doesn't interfere with or it doesn't conflict with our standard, which it shouldn't, since that's what they were written by, then they should be okay. Self-assessment, that type of thing.
Perfect. I appreciate it. Any other questions from any of our guests here? No, Mr. Motley, what are you seeing as far as accident trends over there in Northern Virginia office?
I mean, I think we're seeing the same as just about everybody else. I think they talked about the top 10 most frequently cited standards. And so obviously, we experience or we have the same experience in Virginia as I'm sure they do in the federal and also in the state plan states. There's a big push on trenching safety, and all of our compliance people have been told that, if there's a trench that they're passing by for whatever reason, then they need to stop and conduct, from a consultation perspective, a compliance, courtesy compliance drive-by, or even open up an inspection if necessary, because, we've had quite a number, at least within last year, at the end, before COVID-19 became the big topic. Trenching safety was one of the hot button issues, just simply because of the number of incidents that have occurred. So I think we're experiencing a lot of the same things that the rest of the state plans and federal OSHA are experiencing.
Gotcha. And then another question just came in. Has OSHA cited anyone yet for the emergency temporary standard?
And the answer to that is, I don't know.
Okay.
I believe so. Okay. I know we've gotten quite a number of complaints. We've gone out on a number of them, kind of like Maryland. We've done the phone and fax in a lot of cases. I don't know the answer to that, but I would be happy to get that information for you so that you can relate that to your audience.
Okay, that'd be great. All right, final call for questions, and we'll let them get upon their way. Again, we greatly appreciate everybody coming out. We appreciate our presenters. It's really great to have these opportunities that when you're not staring down the end of a compliance officer there, you're actually getting it ahead of time. So that's probably the best time to get it. And of course, a few things that I want to mention. All these will be available on the cinconline.com. I put that on the chat box there. You have my contact information on the chat box should you have any other questions. One other thing I'll let you know, speaking to Mr. Motley about the sanitation, NHB reached out and we shot a video about a week ago. It should be out maybe next week on their free toolbox talks about sanitation and the importance of it on job sites. It's only like a 4-minute toolbox talk type video. They're free to use. So if you go to nhb.org/safety, there's a ton of resources from National Home Builders. I think we've done, I want to say 17 or 18 video toolbox talks. They're all done in English and Spanish. They're available free for use. You can also find them on YouTube. So again, we're just trying to get good resources out there for you to use. Instead of having 20 people huddled around a truck doing a toolbox talk, it might be better to get some of these links out to people so they are socially distanced so they can watch them from their own devices and still capture some of that information. And we're going to try to continue at least once a month to do a safety timeout on our website where we'll pick a topic and we might have some people from OSHA, Motion, OSHA back, hopefully, and some other people like we had this week, and you'll be able to access that library. This is all free. Again, this is just meant to get the message out there. We're not all about charging every time you pick up the phone. I've always told people, if you ever have a question, I'd rather you call me than me read about one of your people, unfortunately hurt or killed on one of your job sites. I don't charge for that. We do have the consulting side. We'll put that little plug in. If you need us, pay for us. But if not, just asking questions, you need some free resources, we'll be happy to point you in that direction too. We're really passionate about what we do here at C. So that's why we do stuff like Safety Fest. With that, I'm not seeing anything else in the question box here. So I will go ahead and turn off the recording. Again, if you need me, I'm on there, safetymurph13@aol.com, same email I've had for the last 22 years, I think now. So that hasn't changed yet. I don't think it'll change anytime soon. And website, cinconline.com. And my cell phone, if you ever need to get a hold of me, 703-930-2760. I'm more than happy to either try to answer the question or point you in the right direction if needed. With that, I hope everybody has a great, safe weekend and refocuses a little bit and start Monday morning hitting the ground, getting your safety programs back up and running for more than just COVID, but definitely meet that OSHA standard. Did have one more that came in, and I think I can answer this, but Mr. Motley, you might want to hang for just a second. The question was, if they're meeting the Virginia guidelines, would MOSH and OSHA accept those guidelines? And correct me if I'm wrong, but because it's greater than the baseline that is set by OSHA, then yeah, you're going above and beyond by using Virginia's guidelines. So I don't think that's a bad thing. But either Erica or Jim, if you want to chat on that.
I'll give that to Erica if they would accept that. Simply, I don't know what OSHA or MOSH would do. I know if it were in the Commonwealth of Virginia, CDC guidelines are appropriate in lieu of or to be considered in compliance. I would, think that that they certainly would take that into consideration. If you're following Virginia guidelines, you're following the CDC. But I would certainly ask them what they thought.
That would be the same here for us, except for maybe healthcare, where we have a little bit more stringent policies for PPE and things like that. But as long as employers are following the CDC guidelines, that's all we can uphold in Maryland.
Okay, very good. Well, we will, any of those things that you want posted to, we've got a COVID link on our website, or anything that the OSHA presenters feel like you want out there, we'll be happy to, again, post it and make it available for people. And again, if anybody else has any questions, feel free to ask. We'll go ahead and end this session. And again, thank you all and enjoy your day. Please be safe out there, and we'll talk to you in the future. All right. Have a good one.